Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really getting into something fascinating.
Yeah.
A source that's, well, it's dense, but incredibly rich.
Yeah, definitely.
We're looking at a text called Inie Sikhe, The Path of Sufism. And this isn't your standard religious guidebook.
Not at all. It's mapping out an inner world, a spiritual journey. It uses Islamic concepts, sure, but it goes much, much deeper, places you might not expect.
Right. Think of it like a guide to an inner expedition, a very specific pathway that this text lays out.
Exactly. And our goal here in this deep dive is to sort of act as your guides through it. We want to pull out those key insights, the aha moments.
Make it click.
Yeah, help you grasp the main stages, the core ideas of this particular spiritual path. It's really a deep look into how this tradition understands the spiritual journey itself.
And look, we get it. Texts like this can feel intimidating, a bit like stepping into deep water. New terms, new angles.
Absolutely.
But that's what we're here for. We'll break it down, focus on the real nuggets, the memorable stuff this source offers.
So, okay, where does this path, this specific Tariqah, actually begin according to the text? It lays down a non-negotiable starting point.
Which is?
Shari'ah, the religious law. It's presented as the absolute necessary foundation. You just can't skip it. It's the ground floor.
The bedrock, yeah. And the Tariqah, this spiritual path we're talking about, it's built right on top of that.
Directly. It has its own practices, its own stages, but they're like totally connected to that Sharia foundation. Can't have one without the other, really.
The text uses some strong analogies for this, doesn't it?
Oh, yeah. Very direct. It says, flat out, no Sharia, no religion. That's rule number one.
Simple enough.
And then it links the Tariqah to inner refinement. It says, no Tariqah, no proper manners, using the word adab. So the path itself is about cultivating this deep inner conduct.
And it even uses these practical religious examples to explain inner states.
Yeah.
Right, like the struggle against the self.
Exactly. That struggle, Mujahidah, is positioned as essential for suluk, the actual journeying on the path. And the analogy it uses is purification, istinja, being essential for ablution, wudu. You need the first for the second to be valid. Same idea here. No inner struggle, no real journey.
That makes sense. You have to clear the way first.
Right. And it builds on that. Suluk, the journeying, is then essential for seer, which is like traversing, moving through these spiritual landscapes.
And that's compared to?
Wudu being essential for prayer, salat. No wudu, no valid prayer, no suluk, no meaningful seer. It's step-by-step, foundational.
Okay, so Shari'ah is the ground. Tariqah adds the inner work and manners. Mujahidah is the engine for suluk and seer. Where does all this traveling lead? What's the destination?
Well, the text describes the endpoint of this seer as tear, flight.
Flight, like literal flight.
Spiritual flight, yeah. And it doesn't just end anywhere. It leads to proximity. The text calls it al-India, and ultimately union, makum al-wasla, with the divine.
Union.
Wow, and it specifically ties this to that verse about being in a seat of truth near a sovereign king. That's the peak attainment described here.
Okay, so the path goes from outward rules, Shari'ah, deep into internal work, Tariqah, Mujahidah, suluk, seer, and culminates in this spiritual flight towards divine closeness. Now, here's where it gets really interesting, I think. The text says the start of the Tariqah is manners, adab. We got that.
Yeah.
But the final stage, that state of proximity, al-India, it says it's outside the form of paradise, but within its meaning. What does that even mean?
That's a crucial point, yeah. It suggests the highest spiritual state isn't quite captured by, let's say, the standard descriptions of paradise.
Just something else.
Something deeper, maybe. The text goes further. It says the perfect human isn't actually contained by paradise. They are contained by the paradise of their heart.
The paradise of their heart. Okay, wait, so paradise isn't just a place you go to.
Exactly. It's a state you embody. It's internal.
That completely flips the script. And this connects to that incredible quote, the Hadith Qudsi.
Right. My earth and sky do not contain me, but the heart of my believing servant contains me.
So why? Why the heart?
Well, the text explains it like this. Earth and sky, they belong to the physical world, the manifest realm, mulk, shahada.
What we see and touch.
Right. But the heart, it argues, originates from the unseen, the spiritual world, malakut, kaib. And because of that origin, it has a vastly wider capacity for divine manifestation. The divine names, the attributes, they can reveal themselves within the heart in a way they simply can't in the physical universe. The heart's potential is just bigger in that sense.
So the journey isn't just about reaching an external destination. It's about cultivating your inner reality, the heart, until it
Yeah.
becomes the place of ultimate bliss, of divine presence.
Precisely. That's a huge takeaway right there.
It really is.
And to help us grasp this inner journey, the text uses an analogy. Think about a physical journey like traveling to the Kaaba.
Okay.
As you travel, your understanding grows, right?
Yeah.
Your knowledge of the place increases with each stage until you finally arrive. The spiritual journey is similar. It involves an increase in knowledge. But this knowledge isn't about physical places. It's knowledge of those unseen realms, Malakut, sovereignty, and Jabarut, divine power.
What kind of knowledge are we talking about? What are you actually uncovering there?
You're unveiling the secrets behind the divine names and attributes, seeing how they operate in reality, peeling back layers, you could say, until you reach what the text calls the self-identity al-huwiya at-datiya.
The self-identity, like the core reality.
Something like that. Knowing the ultimate essence of existence.
And reaching that point, is that it? Journey over.
According to the source, yes, arriving there marks the total ascent as Su'ud al-Kuli. And here's a key point. After this ascent, the journey, the seeking part, actually ends.
Ends.
Yeah. The text says only the descent al-Hubut remains for full attainment.
Okay, hold on. Ascent, ascend, ascent, reach the peak. And then the journey ends with descent. That sounds counterintuitive. What does that mean for the seeker?
It's a really fascinating idea, isn't it? It suggests that reaching the absolute pinnacle of inner knowing isn't the final state of being.
So what is the descent in?
It implies bringing that incredibly profound realization back, integrating it fully, embodying it, living it out in your presence and actions in the world. It's not just about knowing, it's about being that knowing.
Ah, okay. Bringing it down to earth in a way.
Exactly. And the text quotes a master saying something like, the Sufi is one who has no dahab, place to go, because that path of seeking the ultimate, it's finished for them. They've arrived.
There's nowhere left to go spiritually.
That seems to be the idea. And the text stresses this is a state of doc taste, direct experiential knowledge. Words can't really capture it fully.
Right.
And the ultimate finding at the end of all this, it's described in almost mind-bending terms. Infinite infinity, malaniyata wahida, found where?
In the heart.
In the heart, not through the senses, not through external powers, within.
Infinite infinity. Inside the heart, it keeps coming back to that. And the text really elevates this inner knowing.
Absolutely. It insists that divine knowledge related specifically to the heart, this inner realization, is the noblest science there is.
Okay, but while this divine knowledge is the ultimate goal, the text isn't saying abandon everything practical, right? You still live in the world.
Not at all, no. It's quite pragmatic there. It says learn necessary worldly knowledge, but, minimally. Just enough.
What's the example it gives?
Learning tajweed, the rules for reciting the Quran. Learn enough so you don't make mistakes in your prayer. Get the essentials right for your outward practice. But
Focus your main energy elsewhere.
exactly. The text says the rest of your time and effort, real itihad, striving should be poured into knowing God through suluk, the spiritual journey.
And there's a condition.
A crucial one. You need a guide. Someone who can distinguish right from left on this inner path. You can't just wander off on your own.
Because
Because, as the text warns, the paths are many and crossing them is not easy. It's complex territory.
So what's identified as the biggest hurdle, the main obstacle on this difficult path?
You might think it's some, major spiritual adversary, but the text points to something much closer to home.
Which is?
The world of mulk, the physical manifest world around us.
Our everyday reality. Why is that the hardest obstacle?
Because of familiarity, it says. And because we're so stuck on sensory perception, we're just completely immersed in what we see, hear, touch, taste, smell. Our attention is constantly pulled outward. It creates this veil, stops us seeing the deeper reality within and, even behind the physical.
Okay, so if the sensory world is the biggest distraction, how does the text suggest we deal with that? It mentions a specific recommendation from the wise ones, the Hukama.
Yes, a rather striking one. They recommended seeking solitude, specifically in a dark, empty place.
Dark and empty. Why?
Precisely to cut off the sensory input. To stop the noise and sights of the physical world constantly bombarding your awareness, it's a direct method to quiet the external static.
That sounds intense. What happens if someone actually does this? Solitude, controlling thoughts, constant remembrance of God dhikr, eating moderately and lawfully.
The text says the veil of multiplicity starts to lift. You stop seeing the world as just a collection of separate, disconnected things.
And instead?
Instead, your inner vision, al-basira, awakens. It allows you to perceive the signs of divine unity woven through the entire universe. This initial stage, seeing unity in the physical, is called the journey in the world of bodies. Alam al-Sham.
And the text makes an observation about seekers who reach this point, doesn't it?
It does. It notes that many seekers get here. They achieve this initial opening, this glimpse of unity in creation, and they stop.
They feel like they've arrived.
Perhaps. They're distinguished by having reached this far, for sure. But according to this text, they don't proceed to the, let's say, higher or more subtle stages described next.
Because there is a kind of hierarchy of ascent presented here.
Exactly. It outlines a progression, different journeys leading to different levels of insight.
Okay, lay those out for us.
So first, that journey in the world of bodies, alam al-Sam, that leads to tawhid, realizing God's oneness within the physical creation, seeing the one in the many.
Got it. What's next?
Moving deeper, there's the journey in the world of spirits, alam al-Arwa. This leads to tajrid, abstraction.
Abstraction.
Yeah, like moving beyond attachment to forms, seeing the underlying spiritual reality behind them, less focused on the manifestation, more on the source.
Okay. And a highest level.
The highest is the journey in reality, al-Haqiqah. And this leads to tafrid, singling out.
Singling out. What does that mean?
It implies an absolute, exclusive focus on the divine reality itself, beyond even the concepts of unity within creation or abstracted spirit. It's presented as superior even to absolute tawhid and tajrid in this framework.
Superior, wow.
Yeah, it's seen as the peak realization. The text links it to the saying, Sabaka al-Mufaridun, the single ones have surpassed.
But wait, surpassed implies movement, progress. How can you move or surpass if you're at this point of absolute singularity?
That's where the text introduces this beautiful paradox. The movement isn't physical, not at all. It's purely spiritual.
Okay.
It's described as movement of stillness, harakat as-sukun manawiya. Your outward self might still be doing good deeds, having good intentions, those support the state, but the actual perceiving at this level, the seeing and hearing, it's not through your eyes and ears. It's through this awakened inner faculty.
So it's like progress in pure consciousness, not moving through space.
Exactly. Movement of stillness.
Yeah.
Perceiving without physical senses. These ideas really push you to rethink what travel or seeing could possibly mean at that level.
They definitely do. And this whole intense inner journey, the text frames it within the larger purpose of life itself, right?
Yes, it gives a very specific reason for why we're even here in this manifest world.
Which is?
To engage in combat, al-muharaba.
Combat against what?
Against the self, the lower egoic tendencies, against its negative attributes, and against, well, negative spiritual influences, Satan is mentioned.
So life isn't just about existing or learning things in the usual way. It's fundamentally a spiritual battlefield.
According to the source, yes, that's the frame. And the goal, the desired outcome, is victory as Zafar. And gaining the spoils of the spirit, Ganamaru.
Okay, victory and spoils. But there's a condition on when you can gain these.
A very important one. This victory, these spoils, they are gained after reaching spiritual maturity. Al-buru ila mabla arishal. Not before.
So you can't just, wish to die young and pure to avoid the fight.
Quite the opposite. This text insists the struggle itself is what leads to maturity and makes gaining those spiritual spoils possible. You have to engage.
Right. Maturity comes through the struggle.
Precisely. And then the text does something really interesting. It draws a parallel between 5 types of this greater jihad, the inner struggle, and 5 different scenarios in lesser jihad, meaning outer physical battle. It uses the familiar to explain the unfamiliar.
Okay, let's walk through those parallels. What's the first one?
First, dying young spiritually before achieving maturity through significant inner struggle. That's likened to dying on the way to the physical battlefield before you've even fought. The text says there's basically no virtue in that kind of premature end.
Okay, so no points for dropping out early. What's second?
Second, dying while actively engaged in the path of inner struggle, really wrestling with the self, the negative forces. This is like fighting and dying in physical battle for God's cause. It's seen as a state of witnessing to truth.
A noble end in that sense. Third,
being captive to your ego or to negative spiritual forces. This is directly compared to being taken prisoner by enemy forces in the outer world, a state of being overcome.
fourth.
Fourth, backsliding, starting on the spiritual path, making progress, and then turning away from it. This is compared to backsliding from Shari'ah itself. It's presented as a really severe, dangerous state to be in.
Right, losing ground you've gained. And the last one, the fifth.
Fifth, this is the ideal. Struggling consistently, overcoming the inner enemies of the self, its negativity, and emerging victorious with those spoils of the spirit. This is likened to winning the outer battle, defeating the enemy, and returning home with the spoils of war.
That last one sounds like it perfectly mirrors the whole journey we've been discussing: origin, struggle, and a victorious return with spiritual gains.
It really does, and the text hammers this home. The highest state is this victory over the inner enemies, securing those spiritual spoils. It gives a strong warning about falling into backsliding or captivity.
And it differentiates people based on this.
Clearly, it distinguishes between those who only adhere to the outer Shari'ah and those who combine Shari'ah with this intense inner path, the Tariqah, and ultimately arrive at Haqiqah, reality.
So achieving that inner victory in this life seems absolutely critical for what comes next after death.
According to this text, yes, it's directly connected. It talks about states like purgatory, the barzakh, the gathering, hasher, even hellfire, niran, but it presents them as mechanisms primarily for purifying those whose existence was still metaphorical.
Metaphorical existence.
Yeah, meaning still caught up in appearances, still contaminated by what it calls hidden shirk, subtle forms of association, not fully realizing God's absolute oneness in everything.
Okay, so those states are for purification. What about those who achieved this true existence through the inner path?
They're on a different track entirely. The text argues they've already passed through the essence of these stages: purification, judgment, crossing the path while alive. They did it through their knowledge and their dedicated practice of both Shari'ah and Tariqah.
So when physical death comes for them,
they simply transition. They depart their bodies and arrive directly at their designated spiritual station. They don't need that post-mortem purification process in the same way.
their life was the crossing, the purification.
You could say that, yeah. And their death itself is described uniquely. They died to their accidental existence voluntarily while still alive and returned to the truth, the haq.
Died voluntarily, meaning death to the ego.
Exactly, death to the lower self. This connects to that idea mentioned. Whoever dies, their resurrection has begun. For these individuals, physical death isn't an end followed by a waiting period. It's the immediate start of the next phase, free from the hurdles others face.
And what is their actual physical death like? Is it difficult? Painful?
The text claims the opposite. For the Gnostic, the Irif, the one who has this inner realization, physical death is described as easy, even sweet, not painful.
Why not?
The reason given is quite profound. They are said to be so completely absorbed in contemplating divine beauty, witnessing the secrets of creation unfolding, that they basically lose awareness of physical sensation.
Right, being totally lost in awe.
Precisely. It uses the analogy of the women in the story of Prophet Joseph, who were so stunned by his beauty they cut their hands without feeling it. Similar idea, but the object of contemplation is divine beauty itself.
That's a powerful image. And are there specific benefits listed for them after death?
Yes, several unique points are made. They face no trial of the grave because their faith and certainty were already actualized in life.
Okay.
They don't need the scales, the mizan, to weigh their deeds because they lived the scale of seeking. They achieved balance between their inner and outer lives, fulfilling both Shari'ah and Tariqah.
Their life was balanced?
Right. And they don't cross the bridge, the Sirat, in the way others might fear. Why? Because their title, their balance, their moderation, their walking the straight path in this life was their Sirat.
Wow. So the major stations and challenges of the afterlife that many focus on, for these individuals, they were lived, embodied, and overcome during life itself.
That's the picture painted here, yes.
And what about paradise then, for them?
Paradise is their heart. That's the core idea again. And Kathar, the river or abundance in paradise, that's their true knowledge, their divine gnosis, marifa, that they attained.
So external paradise is just a reflection.
Essentially, yes. Everything described in the conventional paradise is presented as a manifestation, an outward form, of the inner states, the virtues, and the spiritual realities they cultivated and achieved within themselves during their life journey.
This really does turn the whole idea of spiritual reward inside out. Paradise isn't just a destination granted later. The highest form of it is realized and lived from within now.
Exactly. It shifts the focus dramatically.
Which makes you wonder, When does this kind of spiritual opening, this faith or realization typically happen? Does the text talk about timing?
It does address that. Often it's associated with youth, the period of peak physical energy, maybe before or around age 40. That vitality can help fuel the intense inner work the Mujahidah required.
But it's not strictly limited to youth.
No, definitely not. The text acknowledges that attainment can absolutely happen later in life, especially if the person started the serious inner struggle earlier on.
Does it give examples?
Yes. It mentions people who reached high spiritual states later in life, sometimes after significant shifts or transformations. But it also notes cases of people having major unveilings or even receiving revelation before 40, some even in childhood.
So really, age isn't the deciding factor.
That's the conclusion the text leans towards. Age matters for worldly things, maybe physical capacity, but the inner spiritual journey operates on a different timeline. The author even mentions that he personally stopped worrying about age for attainment and just surrendered the when to God.
That surrender seems to be a recurring theme. Okay, what about after physical death? There's that saying, people are asleep, when they die, they awaken. Does this text suggest that awakening means everyone can make spiritual progress after death?
The text actually presents two different scenarios, two distinct possibilities regarding post-mortem progress. It depends on who you were in life.
Okay, what's the first scenario?
This is for the sincere seeker. Someone genuinely on the path, striving, but who dies an involuntary physical death before reaching the ultimate goal, before achieving that voluntary death to the ego.
What happens to them? Can they still progress?
The text suggests yes, they can. They get a share of the reward and the potential progress of those who did reach the goal. It quotes that Quranic verse about the emigrant who dies on the way. His reward has already become incumbent upon God. This is applied to spiritual immigration.
So their journey can be completed?
Potentially, yes. Their spiritual potential, the text suggests, can be fulfilled in the barzakh, the interworld. This might happen through spiritual assistance from higher beings or purely through divine grace. They can move from the perceived deficiency they had at death to a state of known perfection. It even mentions a tradition about an angel teaching the Quran in the grave as an example of this kind of post-mortem help.
Okay, so for the genuine seeker who dies mid-journey, there's hope for completion, maybe through grace. What's the second scenario?
This is for the non-seeker, the person who wasn't engaged in this inner path during their life. For them, the text is pretty clear. They do not attain progress in knowing God after death.
No progress at all. Why not?
It cites the verse, and whoever is blind in this life will be blind in the hereafter. And it specifies that this blindness refers particularly to the knowledge of God. If you were spiritually blind to ultimate reality here, you remain so there in that specific sense.
But does the awakening at death mean anything for them?
Well, the text allows that if they had some level of basic belief or knowledge in life, then the lifting of the physical veil at death might bring some relative progress in understanding other things about the hereafter, like comprehending paradise or hell, more clearly than they did before. But crucially, not progress in the direct knowledge or gnosis of God himself.
So the awakening might just be realizing your actual state, rather than improving it spiritually, unless you were already headed in that direction. How does this square with the hadith, when the son of Adam dies, his work ceases? Doesn't that imply all progress stops?
That's a good point, and the text anticipates it. It explains that the hadith refers to actions that depend on our effort, our striving, caused within the physical world, the realm of mulk. Those cease.
Okay.
But things that are gained purely by God's grace, fatal, those are still possible. Striving gets you onto the path and helps you navigate the world of forms, but reaching the higher realms, the malakut, and achieving ultimate realization that's described here as fundamentally a gift, a matter of grace. And grace isn't bound by physical death in the same way effort is, especially for the sincere seeker.
I see. The distinction between effort and grace is key there.
Okay,
so let's try to sum up. What are the core benefits of undertaking this whole demanding inner journey, according to this source?
Well, the absolute fundamental one, as we've kept seeing, is moving beyond that metaphorical existence, being stuck in appearances, ego, hidden shirk, and arriving at real existence, rooted in the divine reality, the haq.
That's the big one. Are there other major benefits mentioned?
Yes, several. Attaining absolute divine mercy and being fundamentally freed from the conditions that bring about divine wrath or displeasure. That's huge.
Definitely. What else?
And this one is really striking. Becoming free from being harmed by others.
Free from being harmed. How is that possible? people can still do hurtful things.
The explanation is fascinating. It says, when you reach this state of realization, you start to witness divine beauty in everything. And crucially, you see all effects, all actions, not just as originating from individual people or causes, but you perceive them from the perspective of the ultimate divine agent behind all reality.
So you see God's hand in literally everything, even difficult things.
That's the idea. You see the event, even if it's outwardly painful or negative, as somehow flowing from the divine will or wisdom. This perspective shift is linked to that saying the text mentions. The tongue of the creation is the tongue of the truth. Every event, every word, every action ultimately reflects the divine reality in some way.
So the harm doesn't land in the same way because you're perceiving the deeper reality, the divine agency behind the surface event. That's a radical reframing.
It is truly transformative, yeah. And the text doesn't just describe these states. It ends with a really strong call to action for you, the listener.
What's the call?
It urges you to seek finding al-Vidan, that inner, direct, experiential realization we've been talking about, because, it warns, Lasa Fakdan, the lack of that inner finding is the root source of all trial, all suffering, all difficulty.
Seek the inner experience because not having it is the real problem. And that means committing fully, right? Sticking to the path's conditions.
Absolutely. The text really emphasizes how vital it is to adhere strictly to the requirements of the path. If you don't, you risk being deprived of Tawfiq divine success or enablement and Taqi true realization.
So what's the essence, the muklis, the core advice from the author on how to actually navigate this?
It really boils down to two things. First, navigate all these dangers, inner and outer, with a knowledgeable guide. Don't go it alone. And second, maybe most importantly, do not be content with just a little bit of seeking. Don't dabble.
Go all in.
That's the strong implication. It even brings up an interpretation of that Quranic verse about the 4 sacred months, suggesting it implies a sincere seeker should aim to dedicate something like 1/3 of their entire life exclusively to seeking God.
1/3 of your life just focused on this spiritual journey. Wow, that really underlines the level of commitment and intensity involved here.
It certainly does, and it adds a sense of urgency. Start early. It quotes as saying, "Awalu al-waqt ridwan Allah." The beginning of time is God's pleasure, meaning start now, don't put it off, because you don't know when your physical time will end.
Don't wait to begin this inner combat, this inner work.
Exactly. And the text's final word is basically an admonition. Be warned, pay attention, don't be like those who are indifferent to this kind of profound guidance and the path it lays out.
Wow. Okay. We have covered an incredible amount of ground here, following this text's map, really, from the foundations in Shari'ah and Tariqah through that intense inner struggle, the ascent.
Yeah, and those startling ideas, like finding infinity within the heart.
Right. And life itself being framed as spiritual combat. And that really unique vision of the afterlife for the soul that achieves realization in this life.
It's definitely a path description that challenges you to look way beyond the surface of things. To consider that ultimate reality, ultimate fulfillment isn't about external stuff at all. It's about a radical inner transformation, the heart consciousness.
And it leaves you with some really potent things to think about, doesn't it? This source really challenges a lot of conventional ideas about religion, about where salvation or fulfillment lies. It makes you ponder, what could it possibly feel like experientially for the journey to end with descent after hitting that total ascent? How does that work? Or maybe even more fundamentally, what does it mean to find infinity, not out there in the stars, but right here, inside your own purified heart?
Or maybe this thought, what if the sirat, the straight path we often think about as something after death, what if this text is right and it's something you're meant to build, to embody, to walk right now? Through that balance I title, through moderation, and through that unwavering inner seeking. This text seems to insist that the keys to whatever comes next are actually forged right here in the choices and the striving of this life.